Hello, my name is Tana Celis, and this is my final presentation for the completion of my master's degree in instruction about best practices in secondary immersion programs, dual immersion or full immersion. I have been teaching currently for 4 years in an immersion program, and this thought really sparked my interest as I have gotten to know my program better. I have noticed that as I began this course and started looking at what I may be interested in, that there was a genuine lack of research done on secondary immersion programs. There's lots of information available about primary programs and the different types of programs that exist, such as dual immersion, where they get 50% in English and 50% in the target language, or full immersion where they keep it to 90% of the target language and 10% of the native language. Um, so my interest began to develop on what would be the best approach in a secondary program. And as I get to know and have gotten to know my students over the years, I began to realize that they make frequent errors that don't necessarily interrupt communication, but they are considered quite basic and novice. And many of these students, prior to arriving to my class, have been in a full immersion program for 6 years, so K through 5. And that is where I decided that I needed to look at what approach would work best in a secondary classroom. So the rationale behind this is that um, students currently, by the time they start my class as a sixth grader, have had 6 years invested into this program, and I'm concerned about their proficiency of Spanish as well as the level of accuracy that they have. They do have a very high level of communication, but their errors are basic and would be considered quite novice. And I wanted to look into how to correct these errors, specifically where a grammar point um, that a student would need to use frequently is involved, because certain grammar points in Spanish language are quite difficult for a non-native speaker to understand. So there are many methods of how to teach a second language and vast research on how to correct errors. But again, there's a lack of research done on how to make these changes within a secondary program. As our programs, specifically to in regards to immersion, continue to grow daily, school annually, school year wise, across the United States, this research is really necessary. So from this, the question that evolved was, at the secondary level, will a dual language approach or a full immersion approach better a student's Spanish language accuracy and decrease L2 errors in the use of a specific grammar point? My experience with this, prior to becoming an immersion teacher, I was a Spanish teacher, and most of the explanation, at least when introducing a topic, was done in English. And then from there, the work was all done in the target language. And the experience that I have as I've gotten to know my students over the years is that the errors that they're making are frequent and common, and I've tried many times to correct and done many activities, games, trying to use different approaches, different methods, different styles to really solidify the correct usage and accuracy of the grammar point we're using. Again, the importance of this, our program is continuing to grow and will be expanding this year. But across the United States, into Canada, and even other countries, immersion programs are growing every day. There is a broad interest. Parents and the public and school districts know what pull immersion programs have for them. They can bring in more students. Um, the benefits, there are positive cognitive benefits. There's so much research done that supports the benefits of how immersion can be so positive for all students. So I think we really need to solidify the importance of these immersion programs. We do need to start conducting research at the secondary level to continue to support students in their growth and have research to back up the positive aspects of immersion programs. My research plan is as followed. This is a plan that's going to be put in place at a Midwest middle school specific to 7th and 8th grade students. 8th grade students have learned this material in 7th grade, but because again it is quite a difficult topic for non-native speakers, we have a review in 8th grade which leads into a bigger project. 7th grade will be introduced to this specific grammar point as first time learners. So the way my schedule is set up, there are 2 sections of each grade level. So I have a 7th grade A, a 7th grade B, an 8th grade A, and an 8th grade B. Each section is going to be chosen at random. One group will be considered the control group that I will continue to teach as I always have. And the other group will be the test group, where instruction will be given in English. All the grammar explanation on my part will be given in English. Students will need to, if they have questions, ask me questions in Spanish. All of their work, interviews, and homework, and any tasks that we do, including notes, will be taken in Spanish. So the change will occur in how instruction is delivered. We will be starting by taking a placement test. So they will first, and you'll see this later in the appendices, appendices. They will first take a placement test where they just have to choose between the first past tense or the second past tense. And we will continue to go on through there by tracking how they're doing and errors they make in oral interviews, written essays, and again through the pre-test and post-test they will be given. The consent and ethics, due to the fact that my position is immersion, I am required to speak 100% of the target language in my classroom. So I will need to not only notify parents, but also administration to get their support. And it's important to do this because I will need proof on if the dual immersion program or approach works better. I'm going to need to show student work, and without parent permission and administration's permission, I'm not going to be able to include those in my results. Also, some students may just not want their work used, and parents may also not want their child's work used in this study because there's various reasons at home. Within my building and within admin, I'm going to need permission because we set ourselves up as a K-12 immersion program. So it is the desire and the plan is that full immersion will be spoken within the classroom. So I really need not only parent support, but student understanding of how class is going to be run, as well as administration's support in the event parents have questions and need to direct questions towards admin. So I will be using, as mentioned, various data collection tools. I have created all of these, although within the program, students take a test that gives them a rank of novice, intermediate, or advanced. They take that in 5th grade and in 8th grade. I am not using those results within my research plan because my research would then need to take place across a 3-year time span, and I think the program and our PTSO board, who's very involved in administration, would probably want to see some initial results before we make a 3-year commitment to the study. So that kind of also goes back to consent and ethics. So the majority, all of the tools that I'll be using to gather will be things that I have done within my own classroom and created. The first, and I'm just showing you an excerpt because it was quite long, is a forced choice response. This will be used as a pre and post instruction data gathering, and it would be considered a test, although the pre-test will not be graded. Students will have to read through a story and choose based on context clues if they need to use the first past tense or the second past tense. Now, again, as mentioned, 8th grade has received this instruction before, so I would assume their test results will be higher. Whereas 7th grade, I think, will really be just guessing and deciding based on which sounds best. Um, so this test will be given right off the bat initially as I start my research, and then again at the end. This will be used for quantitative data because it's really just right or wrong versus some of the other appendices I will be showing you shortly. They will be considered more qualitative, although I think eventually the data will be converted by counting errors, and could then shift to more of a quantitative approach. So this was the first one. You can see there are words bold and underlined. They would have to decide between this verb, kajava or kajo, and they'll have to do that throughout the test. In the second appendix, this is my rubric, which will be used for oral interviews. There'll be a series of oral interviews put in place. Students will be given a question initially right off the bat where they have to respond to a situation that would require use of both past tenses. So this will be the first oral interview. Then as instruction continues, the review of the first past tense, which is called the preterite in Spanish. Students will be, prior to instruction, will be interviewed using a question that will use only that first past tense, the preterite tense. At the end of the unit, they will be given another oral interview that elicits a response using the preterite again. We will be able to go through these recordings and see if there are less errors between the initial first recording and the second recording, as well as start counting and looking at, becoming even more specific with what verbs and with what key concepts are students still struggling. An interview like that will be done as the second unit starts. So a pre-interview and then a post-interview. And once both past tenses have been taught, reviewed, and worked with, the final interview will also be conducted where they need to use both past tenses. So it would elicit a response requiring both past tenses, the preterite and the imperfect. So because I'm an immersion program, all of my rubrics are done in Spanish, and it ranks it on a 1 to 4. The first section looking specifically at verbs, then general grammar and structure, the current vocabulary, and then, the norms that we have in class of how these interviews are done. Another rubric, this would be used based on their writing. So similar to the oral interviews, they'll be posed questions throughout the first section of the unit where they learn the preterite. An initial writing sample will be done that eliciting a response in both past tenses. Then another pre-writing sample, which will just require the preterite, a post-preterite writing sample, a pre-imperfect writing sample, and a post-imperfect, with the final writing sample using both past tenses again. This will really not only allow us to see student growth, but again, it'll also show us where errors are continuing to occur. I think overall, this is important research because there's just a genuine lack of research available to us secondary immersion programs. And I know I, as a professional, am really starting to crave connections to see, what are other programs doing? How can we strengthen our program? What can we do to continue to stand behind our program? My final appendix is to track student results. It also will help me cross-check that I do have their permission slip from home, and just keep a general note. I think it's a simple and easy way to maintain organization, and when parents reach out and want results, it will be an easy way to show student growth or no change based on the results that I find within my research.